A mother separated from her children at the border comes home. The Biden administration has begun an ambitious effort to reunite more than thousands of families torn apart by Trump. By Johnathon Blitzer, May 5th, 2021. The first reunification of Biden era brought Mina left and his brother Eric back together with their mother, Kelly Mabel Gonzalez Breba de Zuniga. For the past 2 years, Kelly Mabel Gonzalez Breba de Zuniga kept a daily ritual. Rising before dawn, she'd walk toward the border in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, where 4 bridges led into El Paso, and visualize herself on the other side. She's a religious woman known to friends, family, and acquaintances as La Pastora, or the pastor. In Juarez, she devoted herself to the city's population of migrants. Recently deported families could call her with the rough coordinates of where they were, highway mile markers, descriptions of intersections. Gonzalez Breba would take a taxi and bring them to some place they could sleep. At migrant shelters, she was a regular presence, delivering sermons and benedictions. But each morning, standing within sight of one of the bridges, she made time to say a prayer for herself. She prayed that the border would open for a moment, just long enough so that she could finally see her children. The last time that she was in the fall of 2017. Her family, fleeing Honduras, had scattered across the continent. Gonzalez Breba's husband and oldest son, who was 18, had already crossed into the U.S. Her mother and niece were in Tapachula, Mexico, near the Guatemalan border. Gonzalez Breba and her 2 middle sons, who were 13 and 15, attempted their final leg of the journey together. It was around noon on a hot day in September when they flagged down a Border Patrol cruiser in the New Mexico desert. They planned to turn themselves in and apply for asylum. A day and a half later, at a holding cell in Deming, 30 miles north of the border, agents took her away in handcuffs to prosecute her for the misdemeanor crime of illegal entry. Her boys screamed and cried. She still remembers the feel of their hands grasping at her clothes. The government assumed custody of her children and moved them to a shelter for minors who'd come to the U.S. alone. Outside of the small circle of government officials, virtually no one that an experiment was underway. Along 260-mile stretch of the border around El Paso, the Trump administration was testing what would become its zero-tolerance policy. The idea was to send a message by criminally prosecuting immigrants for entering the country unlawfully, and in the process by splitting apart parents and children who were traveling together. Gonzalez Breba and her boys were among the first families to separate. By the time the federal judge in California ordered the Trump administration to reunite the families in June 2018, more than 2,000 other cases had been documented. Gonzalez Breba's boys had been released to their aunt in Philadelphia. She remained stuck in an immigration and customs enforcement detention facility in El Paso. Lawyers at a local nonprofit, Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center, filed petitions to delay her deportation, but it was too late. On January 24, 2019, the government flew her to San Pedro Sula, Honduras. Within days, she was making her way north once more. Through Guatemala and into Mexico, her mother and niece were now living in the U.S., too. She was the only one left in limbo. 3 weeks ago, Gonzalez Breba received a text message from Linda Corchado, her immigration attorney in El Paso. In February, Joe Biden had signed an executive order to create a federal task force charged with reunifying families that had been separated under Trump's zero-tolerance policy. The details of how the order might affect Gonzalez Breba's case weren't clear. But government sources were telling Cacciardo that the reunification process could begin before the fall. A week later, Cacciardo sent another message. Kelly, do you know where you can get a passport photos taken in Juarez? The next series of messages came faster. Cacciardo was receiving more information from the Department of Homeland Security. Gonzales Braby was sitting in her room one morning shortly after returning from the bridge when Cacciardo texted a date and time. Gonzales Braby was scheduled to cross into El Paso on Tuesday, May 4th at 8 in the morning. Something different is passing over me now, Gonzales Braby told me. We were speaking through audio memos on Facebook Messenger. I've known her for 3 years and have visited her in the U.S. detention and also Tapachula, where she lived for several months. But hearing her now felt like I was listening to someone else. Her voice was clearer and brighter. She's only 37 years old. And for the first time in dozens of hours of conversation, she sounded like it. I'm returning to life, she said. Still, she was nervous that something might go wrong and decided not to share the news with her children. Instead, she texted her niece a video from the Juarez side of the Paso del Norte bridge. Blessings to you, she began, barely suppressing a smile. She was wearing tinted glasses and a gray, black, and white checkered flannel shirt. Her hair, freshly cut, whipped in the wind. I'm going over there, she said. I'm going all the way up until I'll be with my children. Then she swore her niece to secrecy. If the international bridges connecting Juarez to El Paso were a symbol of hope, they were also a reminder of the greatest trauma of her life. Waiting on the American side were agents from Customs and Border Protection. At one point, she texted Cacciardo, "They're not going to set a trap for me, are they?" unquote. Gonzales Braby had many reasons for harboring doubts. When she and her children were first taken into custody, an agent told them they would be released. All be released. After they were separated, another reassured her that they'd only be apart for a week. Gonzales Braby had come to the U.S. with news clippings, official complaints, police reports, and notarized documents attesting to why she had to flee Honduras. Local hitmen had killed 4 of her brothers. She witnessed the last murder in 2012 and testified against the killers in open court. Ensuing threats forced her family into hiding for the next 5 years. 2 weeks after she and her sons were arrested in New Mexico, an asylum officer from Citizenship and Immigration Services conducted preliminary screening of her case, which Gonzales Braby passed. But another 7 months went by before judge gave her full hearing. On May 21st, 2018, he rejected her claim. According to Gonzales Braby, the proceedings lasted an hour. She stood alone without a lawyer. At no point was she able to share evidence in her defense. Only later did she learn that this particular judge rejected roughly 90% of all asylum cases that came before him. A few weeks later, at the El Paso facility, she typed out a plea to an official who was in charge of overseeing the timing and paperwork of her eventual deportation. "Senor Deportador," she began, "the judge has denied my asylum claim because he says I don't have evidence and that I'm lying. Nearly 9 months without her children," she said, was making her ill, and each day she was getting worse. She pointed out the letter and then, with a pen, drew a circle around 2 sentences for emphasis. "What is it that you all need for someone to get asylum? Do I have to come here injured or dead?" Because Gonzales Braby had been one of the first mothers to be separated under the Trump administration, she wasn't just a victim of the policy, but also a singular witness to its accumulating horrors. Through the spring and summer of 2018, as more grieving mothers arrived in the ICE facility, Gonzales Braby began taking down the names of those in her unit. The columns were nearly ordered on loose sheets of paper with penmanship crisp and careful. Her plan was to mail the list out to lawyers, ICE staffers, and public officials who might be able to help. As word got around that Gonzales Braby was amassing the list, women from other units made contact with her. They were sly handoffs of information in the hallways and in the cafeteria. By the time we met in June 2018, there were 20 mothers on the list and counting, and lawyers at Las Americas had begun to use it to locate clients. I came here thinking I was going to see my children. She told me that last summer. That's what I was told, and the mothers thought so too. Everyone thought that. It was a lie. I finally realized that no one was going to help us find our kids. A long-awaited embrace at Migrant Families Reunification. An hour after before, just so you know, some of these links, if you find this article, you can probably watch these videos. An hour and a half before she was due at the bridge on Tuesday, Gonzales Braby began wheeling 2 suitcases to the border. Cachordo was meeting her on the Mexican side so that they could cross together. Biden's task force had made arrangements for the exchange to go smoothly. Gonzales Braby was entering the U.S. with a special status known as humanitarian people, which will grant her work authorizing and a reprieve from deportation for 3 years. A minute before 8 o'clock, she took her first steps in El Paso, which Cachordo captured with a photograph. Gonzales Braby posed for the camera, twirling in a blue dress and black shoes, with her arms outstretched to the sky. 3 other separated parents are traveling to the U.S. this week to be with their children. The first of hundreds of reunifications that the Biden administration plans to orchestrate over the next several months. According to Michelle Brane, the executive director of the task force, more than 1,000 families remain separated. The administration, she said, is in the process of reviewing additional files to determine if there are more. By the end of Trump's presidency, some 5,500 children were thought to be separated from their parents at the border. That number is known because of a lawsuit filed by the ACLU, but it's still not definitive because Trump officials failed to keep comprehensive and accurate records. Finding every family and giving them an option to reunite and heal from this process is our mandate. Brane told me there are many logistical issues to address. This week's group of parents was relatively easy to coordinate. All 4 of them were already in northern Mexico and had lawyers who could assist with their crossings. Gonzales Braby was the first among them to make it across the border. The rest of her day was spent in transit, a plane to Dallas, a connecting flight to Philadelphia, when she touched down just after 7 o'clock in the evening. The husband of one of her nieces, a large, gregarious man named Freddie, came to get her in a black pickup truck. Gonzales Braby wanted to surprise her sons, but she needed an excuse to get the whole family together without creating suspicion. A team of Australian documentarians whom Gonzales Braby had met in Juarez would be on hand. Freddie and his wife, Viviana, who was also on The Secret, told everyone that the journalists were part of a news crew that would be conducting interviews about Gonzales Braby's legal case. The family, which included more than a dozen people, Gonzales Braby's mother, her 3 sons, her 2 sisters, their children and grandchildren, those children's spouses had made posters ahead of time. Some with words of encouragement, "We miss you and love you," and others with a message for President Biden, "We're asking that you help." Mino left and Eric stand together after reuniting with their mother. By the time Gonzales Braby was collecting her suitcase at the airport, the family was gathering at Freddie and Viviana's place, a small brick row house in northern Philadelphia. The film crew came through the door just after 8. Tucked behind them was Gonzales Braby. There were 15 people crowded in the front of the house for a full second after Gonzales Braby emerged. There was silence, then a jolt, less a sound than a low rumble. As Gonzales Braby's sons rushed to her, her sisters and nieces collapsed in on them. Gonzales Braby disappeared from view. The circle of family members tightening around her. Someone turned up a Christian rock song on a speaker system in the split seconds when Gonzales Braby's sons readjusted their grip around their mother. I caught glimpses of their faces, soaked in tears and flushed deep red. Gonzales Braby's mother, a thin, frail woman, held her arms up to the ceiling like someone at a revival meeting. The volume of the music was so high that the room was both loud and strangely still. Then the speakers cut out, and the house filled with the sound of Gonzales Braby and her 3 children's wailing. Standing on the fringes of the group near the door was Lee Gallant, the lead litigator in the class action lawsuit brought by the ACLU on behalf of separated families. He'd come from New York to congratulate Gonzales Braby and her children. The lawsuit, which Gallant and his colleagues first filed in February 2018, is at the center of the Biden administration's reunification effort, and the government of the ACLU are in the midst of settlement negotiations over what these parents deserve going forward. I've been doing this since 2007, and I don't see it ending very soon, Gallant told me. Like all big civil rights cases, it ultimately comes down to a long grind. Possible forms of restitution beyond securing parole and making travel arrangements include access to medical and mental health services and possible financial compensation. But the most important question is whether the separated families will receive permanent legal status. The parole that Gonzales Braby has received can be renewed after 3 years, but as a form of protection is provisional. What she needs now is a pathway to a green card. There seem to be signs that the Biden administration is taking the settlement negotiations seriously. On Tuesday, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, told me that this week's reunifications were a source of pride because it's just the beginning. I was struck while we talked that he kept referring to the separated parents and their children as victims. The implication was that the previous administration had deliberately mistreated them, which raised questions of redress. We recognize that we need to do more. The humanitarian parole does not provide stable basis to remain in the U.S. for an extended period of time. He said, we're looking at the legal authorities that we have. On Tuesday night at the House in Philadelphia, future legal issues were, for the time being, a distant concern. The mood gradually loosened and food started to come out of the kitchen. A dining table filled with large platters of rice and beans, carne asada, pico de gallo, and cups of horchata. Gonzales Braby and her son sat around the table, laughing and sharing photos on their phones. A toddler fell asleep on the couch. The older kids drifted up to the porch. Someone rolled out what looked like a birthday cake with the words "Welcome Home" written in icing. Gonzales Braby's oldest son, Alex, quietly took it all in. He's the most stoic of her children, short and stocky with watchful eyes. In the summer of 2019, with his mother stuck in Mexico, he went to family court with his 2 younger brothers to file a petition to become their guardian. At the time, the 2 younger brothers were living with their aunt, and the financial strain on her was becoming unsustainable. Alex was working multiple jobs and brought his brothers to live with him. But in order for him to qualify as their guardian, all 3 of them had to testify that their parents were out of the picture, and that Gonzales Braby was unable to care for them in Philadelphia. On Tuesday, as the night wore on, Alex kept his usual reserve, but a look of relief had settled on his face. At one point, Gonzalez Braby took him aside. "Thank you for everything you did for your brothers," she said. "I'm so proud of you." This is the end of the article. Thank you.